So yeah, hi everyone, I'm Robyn. Um, I'm the current chair of the ECM committee, although not for much longer. Hand over my crown next month. And I'm also a PhD student, and I also won't be that for much longer either. My deadline is in 75 days and counting. So if I look a bit tired, that's why. Um, but today I'm going to be talking about some of the outreach work that I've done throughout my PhD. But before I go on, I kind of wanted to mention two things. The first is that I'm definitely what I would say an amateur outreacher. So I'm aware that there's people on the call who probably have lots more experience in outreach than I do. So I'm no way saying this is anything I say comes from a place of expertise or anything. And what I would really love is for my experiences and this talk to maybe start some more conversations about how best to do outreach, how best to reach outside our community. And the second thing I thought I'd mention is that I'm really proud to be a woman in mathematics. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is how to use outreach towards the aim of improving the gender gap between men and women in mathematics. And I think in the mathematical community, we have lots of other issues of representation that definitely deserve our attention. But I'm going to be focusing on the disparity between men and women because I feel like that's something I can speak to. Okay. So, not long after I started my PhD, I began an Instagram account to document my journey. And this was mainly because I didn't know anybody that had done a PhD before. I also didn't know any women that had done PhDs, and I had kind of very limited visibility of what that looked like. So I started this account and I started following other women sharing their PhD journeys in mathematics, but also in other subjects. And not long after I started, I posted this photo, which is a photo of me and some of the women I did my undergraduate degree with. This is the week we finished our first year exam. So this is us celebrating that we've made it through first year. And I shared this on, I'm not sure what one it was, but something like International Women's Day or International Day of Women in Maths or something like that. And I said how proud I was to be a woman in maths. And I received a comment from someone I didn't know, a man I didn't know, who, in some not so nice words, they were basically told me to shut up, to be quiet, to get over myself, this kind of thing. And I thought, oh God, like I kind of internalized it, and I thought, oh, do they have a point? Am I really kind of over egging this? The fact that I'm a woman in maths and they haven't really found my path that easy in navigating, kind of joining the mathematical community. So I did what any mathematician does, I guess, and I turned to the statistics. So I had a look around and I found out, in industry, women are still severely underrepresented in core positions in the STEM sector. I also found out that in academia, things were not any better and maybe even worse. And that, less than 15% of UK professors in the mathematical sciences are women. And then something that painted a really bleak picture for me as kind of a aspiring young researcher was that if you make a list of the most cited academics in operational research, which is my area, you make a list of the top 100. If you go down that list, 99 of them are men and only one of them is a woman. And for me, finding that out, that was quite mind-blowing. And also, quite discouraging actually. As kind of aspiring young researcher in this field, I thought, oh, the future doesn't look that that bright actually. My chances don't sound that good. And then I also found research into experiences of PhD students. And this was something I could identify with a lot more. And this found that things like imposter syndrome, not having female mentors, and then experiences of sexism from peers and also from superiors were kind of common themes of experiences of women and gender minorities pursuing PhDs. And this is something, in my experience, I've observed and also to some extent experienced. So after I kind of did all that research, I thought, okay, this guy is just a troll on Instagram, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And actually, there is still such a big deal about being a woman in maths, and this isn't the time to kind of stop talking about it. This is the time to talk more, but also do more about it. And so I started getting opportunities to do outreach work. And not long after I kind of found all this out and was like, I really want to make some change, I found myself stood in a room full of 300 students, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But first, before that, I did a little bit more research about, why does this disparity kind of exist? Um, and I realized, kind of reflecting on my own journey, that there's these stereotypes of individuals within the mathematical community. And one of them is related to, identity, essentially. And it's this idea that maths is masculine, or at least the people that do mathematics, their interests are masculine or singularly scientific. And what's really sad about this is that these stereotypes are endorsed by children, essentially, endorsed from a really young age. And these are acting as barriers to more women getting involved with the mathematical community. And the second thing I found kind of underpinning this sort of mold of what a mathematician is was this belief about competence. So this idea that mathematicians find maths easy, what I like to call the genius myth, this association of child prodigies, and just, that we all walk through and just bosh out a few formulas, go home, no worries. Yeah, and obviously this isn't true, and these kind of ideas of geniuses and child prodigies also linked to the previous slide because they're more often associated with young boys than they are young girls. And so these have real effects in terms of women and young girls visualizing themselves in the mathematical community. So, fueled with this, I found myself stood in front of an incredibly large room, one of the biggest lecture theatres at my university, in front of 300 teenagers, and it was absolutely terrifying, to say the least. And I was desperately trying to think, okay, how am I going to sell mathematics to them? How am I also going to kind of sell myself as this mathematician? It was really hard and it was really scary, but I loved it. And so from that point on, I did lots of other events, and this is just a list of some of them, and some of them I've done more than once over the last couple of years. They're a complete mix of audiences. I've spoken to as little as I think 30 people, maybe even sometimes less, to 300. And some of them are kind of open to everybody, and some of them are more targeted. So events specifically designed to encourage women and non-binary students to pursue careers in the mathematical sciences. But in total, kind of reached a large body of students. And so what I wanted to share was how I designed that kind of outreach to have maximum impact. Because if I'm completely honest, even though I desperately wanted to make these 300 teenagers think I was cool, I don't think I ever really succeeded with that. I'm sure some of them thought I was totally lame. But I do think I had some kind of impact. And what I love about working with children is that they're so honest. When you're giving a talk, you can see on their faces how they feel about it. And they'll tell you, quite frankly, how they feel about it, which is wonderful because you kind of get this unfiltered feedback, which I wanted to share with you. And there's sort of three main things I feel like I wanted to try and do differently to have this kind of impact. And the first one is that I talk throughout my talks about things that went wrong, or times I felt like a failure, or I had anxiety or had doubts about what I was doing, or whether I deserved my place in the mathematical community. I talk quite frankly about my journey into maths, which was a little bit convoluted, and I was a dropout, a university dropout. I went to university to study a completely different thing around 10 years ago now, and I dropped out, which came with a lot of shame. And then eventually I found kind of the courage to give give maths a go, and yeah, I guess the rest is history. But I speak about those moments of insecurity and not seeing the path forward. Um, and this led to a piece of feedback from a student, which really surprised me. So after one of my talks, the student came up to me and they asked me, "How did you get over imposter syndrome?" Which I found fascinating and quite sad actually, because the student couldn't have been more than 16 or 17 years old. And maybe perhaps I'm naive, but I didn't expect someone of that age to know about imposter syndrome, um, and definitely not to feel like an imposter themselves. You know, children, I think, should be confident in everything they do and should see the world as their oyster, and shouldn't already think, oh, you know, I can't be whatever I want to be. So that was really fascinating. And, you know, I spoke to them about, well, I kind of laughed, I think, and thought, oh, I'm definitely not over it. You know, it's like one of the biggest devils in my life. But maybe these are some strategies that I do to try and convince myself, you know, I do deserve to be here and to go for what I want. And so we had a really lovely conversation. And I think talking about these kind of things earnestly is something that most of the audiences craved. And I think that's reflected as well within teacher feedback, in which students felt that talks were relatable. And on that kind of note, the second thing I definitely wanted to bring in was, you know, to hell this kind of genius myth and acknowledge that maths is hard, um, and that we don't find it easy. And a lot of the time, you know, if you're stuck on something, one, you should definitely be stuck. That's great. That's a great sign. You know, we're mathematicians. We're meant to get stuck. But two, you know, it's not a reflection of you or your abilities. It's the maths is the problem. You're not the problem. So yeah, and this led to one of the most amazing interactions I've ever had with a student. And it was during a quite a small event where the majority of the attendees were boys, and I really didn't think it was going that well. And I spoke at the end. A girl came up to me and she spoke to me and wanted to ask me some questions. Um, and soon after that we started talking, I realized that actually it wasn't just me and her talking, and kind of listening in around us was all the other girls in the class, which was only a handful, maybe about 4 or 5. So we ended up having this group conversation and they were just firing questions at me, and it was so fascinating to get insight into what they were thinking about. And so many of the questions were about identity, you know, wanted to know what how many other girls there were in my office, you know, and things like that. And did I do further maths, and, you know, these kind of things, and whether they could picture themselves, I guess, in shoes like mine, essentially. But anyway, at the end of the conversation, the girl initially talked to me as we were saying goodbye. She said, you know, I love maths, but I never thought I could be a mathematician because I'm not the best at it. She said, I'm just average. And then she said, but it sounds like you're average too, so maybe it's fine. Which was just hilarious. Because, well, for one, it was very joyful because I was so grateful to her for saying that. Because I thought, yes, everything I've been trying to get through has obviously landed. You know, she realizes that you know, it's her choice. If she wants to pursue mathematics, that's all that's needed. You know, that's amazing, and anybody can be a mathematician. So I was delighted. But I was also just someone had just told me I was average to my face, which was quite kind of hurt a little bit, but also, you know, just hilarious. Like I say, kids are very honest, and she's absolutely right. So I loved her for that. But yeah, okay. And then the third thing that I try and embed in my talks is that I have lots of other interests and passions. And I guess one obvious way I do this is through the maths that I'm disseminating, and use applications to non-traditional things. For instance, I talk about how you can use game theory to predict the end of TV shows like Game of Thrones, or also Shakespeare plays and things like that, and how we can use linear regression to predict how much Avatar is going to make at the box office, you know, these kind of things. And this is fascinating because it always happens in the same way, but responses from students about this is that they almost come rushing up to me and then confess like it's a secret, like a dirty little secret they have, and they say, oh, I love maths, but I also love fashion. And things like that. I'm like, great, that's awesome, you know, like that's amazing. And I think it's for so long kind of we've sort of perpetuated this expectation that if you're interested in maths, you can only be interested in maths or in science. And I think it's wonderful that, you know, we celebrate how we're all three-dimensional people with lots of other interests. And yeah, so I've had fashion, I've had philosophy, I've had history. So yeah, that is something that clearly has an impact. And on the right here, this teacher feedback, I remember this, and I honestly don't think I'll ever kind of have a moment as impactful as this, because the students told me this to my face, and then very kindly the teacher followed up in a feedback form and said the same thing. And that the students told me that they were going to carry on because they saw themselves reflected kind of in this talk, and their I guess their diversity of their interests and their passions and who they are as people, which was amazing. So yeah, wonderful experience. So on the idea of sharing my interests, I wanted to take this one step further. And I wanted to write an article, and you have to bear with me, I'm going to take a little bit of a tangent here. I promise I'll bring it back. But I wanted to write an article about one of my huge, I guess, passions in my life, which is K-pop and K-dramas. So these are Korean cultural exports, and they're examples of what's known as the Korean wave. And in Korean, it's called Hallyu, so you might have heard it referred to as Hallyu. But essentially, this is a cultural phenomenon that so many people are investigating in the humanities to try and understand. And it's the astronomical rise in popularity of Korean cultural exports. So things like pop music, things like dramas, TV dramas, food, beauty and skincare. And yeah, it's been in the news lots of times. So you probably have read about it, but if you still think you've never heard of or been affected by the Korean wave, I want to show you some examples that might ring a bell. So in the top left and top right, we have Parasite, which is an Oscar-winning film. It won the Oscar for Best Picture in 2019. It was actually the first non-English language film to do so. And then in the middle there we have Psy, Gangnam Styling. This broke the internet in 2012, I think.
Sorry, Robyn, we can't see your screen.
You can't?
No, you're not sharing your screen, I don't think.
I can see it.
I can see it.
Oh, sorry. It's just
You
me.
must have
Sorry.
internet issues, Stephen.
Oh, no worries. Thanks for telling me though, because if I wasn't, that would have been embarrassing. I appreciate it. But that's a shame. You really do want to see Psy Gangnam Styling. It's a delight. Well, hopefully you can get that fixed, but thank you. Yeah, and then we have also some examples of K-pop phenomenons here. So the girl band in the top right called Blackpink. They recently headlined Coachella, one of the US's biggest music festivals. And then in the bottom, in the middle, we have the 7 members of BTS. They're the largest boy band in the world. And on the left, you might recognize characters from Squid Game. So I think that still holds records on Netflix as the most streamed TV show. But I will say, as an avid K-drama fan, there are so many more K-dramas than Squid Game. There's definitely a bigger world beyond Squid Game. But yeah, so these are examples of the Korean wave kind of in action. And it has real influence that's kind of made the news, not just, you know, economic booms, but also kind of aims related to charity and also in politics. This one in the top right is kind of my favorite story about K-pop fans and their power. And it's that they came together and bought loads of tickets to a Trump rally in Tulsa, and then didn't show up, so that when Trump went out, there was nobody there, essentially. So K-pop fans completely schooling, well, the president-elect. And on the left here is an example kind of what K-pop fans can really do when they pull together in terms of charity and kind of bring money together. So BTS, this huge boy band, they donated $1 million at the height of the Black Lives Matter campaign to the organization, and that was matched by their fandom. But something about the Korean wave, and I guess why I'm bringing this all up and why I chose this as the subject of an article, is that the Korean wave, or focusing on this kind of topic, directly opposes this stereotype that people in the mathematical community are masculine. Because the Korean wave is definitely not a masculine interest, and it's not driven by men. It's primarily driven by women and girls. Okay. So I went, because I'm really interested in K-pop and K-dramas, I went to a exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, exploring the origins of the Korean wave. And I found out something absolutely fascinating, which really prompted this article. And it was that the origins of the Korean wave are essentially numerical, and they were orchestrated. So here is the president of Korea in 1994. His name is Kim Yong-sam. And he was presented with a statistic. And the statistic was that in order to make as much money as the Hollywood blockbuster Jurassic Park, Korea would need to make 1.5 million Hyundai cars. And at the time, Hyundai cars were kind of the epitome of what Korea was offering to the international market. So essentially what this number of 1.5 million, which is huge, was telling him was that a film about dinosaurs could overshadow, what they were offering. And it showed them the power of culture. So Kim Yong-sam started investing into cultural industries. He gave conglomerates like Samsung money. And then 30 years later, boom, we have these headlines all about the Korean wave, and people are trying to understand it. So for me, this was a mathematician. This was just too good, right? I was like, listen, I know maybe people in the mathematical community prefer masculine interests, or at least there is this stereotype, and people think people in the mathematical community prefer masculine interests. But I really think we should write an article about K-pop, because this is fascinating. So that's what I did. I set out to write this thing about and figure out, what will we kind of see this turn of the tide of the Korean wave, or how long will it keep growing? Also, what aspects of the Korean wave are driving it the most? So I modeled it as something contagious, and this was really fun, actually. So I used a very quite simple model in epidemiology called an SIR model. And normally this stands for susceptible, infectious, recovered, because it's used to model diseases, and it's not very positive. So I really love flipping this on its head and actually saying this is a contagion of joy, bringing joy to so many people across the globe. But it works in exactly the same way, in that I split the population into 3 groups. So those who hadn't yet experienced any kind of Korean content, hadn't heard K-pop or Gangnam Style, or watched a Korean drama like Squid Game. I called these people fan potentials. And then I said we have this kind of contagious group, contagious with a K, and they're people who are newly fascinated by some aspect of Korean content. And because they're newly fascinated with it, they're sharing it with everybody that they know, because Korean content is amazing, and they're so desperate for people to watch their same drama or listen to songs. And because of this, they're also engaging with related content online, and this is fueling algorithms to make sure maybe one swoon-worthy scene from one K-drama could land on the feed of somebody who also is likely to enjoy it. And then I said, okay, there's this 3rd group, and these are people who found their kind of home, their K community. Perhaps they've joined a university society, or a Facebook group, or something like that, where they've met other fans of Korean content. And because they have friends now within that sphere, they're no longer sharing their fascination with people outside of that group. And what the SIR model allows us to do is kind of model the movement through these groups. You can say, find an expression for, okay, how does the size of the fan potential group deplete, and how does the contagious grow? And similarly, we can say, okay, how do people find this kind of K community, and at what rate does the contagious group shrink? So unfortunately, it's really hard to find real life data on how many K-pop fans are around the world. So difficult. No one records this. So instead I had to kind of get creative and use a proxy. So I use this idea that, okay, if someone's searching for something on Google, say a term like K-pop, it might be because they've been newly exposed to K-pop and want to find out more. So I used this data from Google and fitted this model to it. And one really fun thing about SIR models is they give us what we know as an R number, I guess from COVID briefings. Here, of course, it's not an R number, it's a K number. But this tells us, how contagious the Korean wave is. And if it's above 1, we know that passion and enthusiasm for this kind of content is growing. If it's less than 1, it's shrinking. And so I did separate analysis on K-dramas and also K-pop, and I found that K-pop was like around 3 times as contagious as K-dramas. So it seems like K-pop is really driving the force of the Korean wave, but both aspects, we're seeing kind of this ballooning of enthusiasm for these kind of things. We definitely have a wave on our hands. And you can also look at things like herd immunity using these models. And so I called this Hallyu herd immunity, and this can tell us, when is the height of the Korean wave? Have we reached it? And what I found was that we're actually, if we hadn't yet reached the height of the Korean wave, we were close to it. And that meant, the influence of this fandom would likely be present for some time. So I wrote this article, had a lot of fun with it. And then I sent it off to a competition run by the Royal Statistical Society. And in 2023, I won their award. And as a result of that, I was published in Significance magazine. And I got to speak at the Royal Statistical Society's conference about my article. And I thought a lot around that time about, oh my gosh, how are these very serious statisticians going to take me seriously? Talking about K-pop and boy bands and TV shows and things like that. But I had a really lovely audience, and they were very supportive of me. And I think the only reason that this article was enjoyed by others was because I was kind of staying authentic to myself and writing about something I knew about and also I loved and I had passion for. And I think it really shows, there is appetite for these kind of non-masculine interests or stereotypically non-masculine interests in the mathematical community. And if we take a shot, sometimes you can end up speaking to large audiences about them. We can definitely diversify that view of what mathematicians are interested in. Okay, so I'm kind of to the end now, and I hope this has been useful, but I wanted to kind of summarize some of the things I've learned, because over the last couple of years doing this outreach and writing this article, I've learned so many things, and there's been so many things I've been surprised by, which I think are worth sharing. And the first is something I find quite horrifying, actually, and it's actually that the perceptions of who kind of fits the mathematician mold, ideas about this stereotype, they set in so early. And that's really discouraging sometimes. And I feel like we need more to ensure that we can combat these. Students already know that perhaps they are not reflected in the mathematical community before they're even leaving school, and sometimes even leaving primary school. So that's quite alarming. And the second thing is that I've really enjoyed all the outreach I've done. And I think whatever you do or put into outreach, absolutely get back, if not, tenfold. And something I was really surprised by was that how much I could relate to what students were concerned about from my own journey, but also my daily life now as a PhD student and kind of moving through academia. And I guess I'm not, it's within 10 years of age difference, but really different stages of our lives. And yet, students would be saying things about, sexist comments made by their male peers in class. And I was like, oh yeah, actually I had someone made a comment in my office of a similar vein, this week. It's quite sad, but I didn't expect students to be facing those kinds of things so young. And actually so much, you can learn so much from them. I could relate to a lot of what they were going through, and also how they were kind of navigating these challenges about seeing their futures. And one thing I did just want to mention, because I want to be transparent about it, is that obviously I've done so much outreach and I would love for more people to do outreach. But I do think embedding these kind of themes into outreach is really difficult. It's not easy to stand up in front of an audience and talk about the time you dropped out of university, or those lowest moments, or finding things really difficult, or your failures or your doubts. It's when you're authentic to your interests and your own journey, you are exposed in some way, and that can be really hard. And I find that really difficult. As rewarding as I find outreach, sometimes I leave and I think, oh, that was a lot. I feel quite exposed. I need to go hide in a hole for a little bit. I think it's really hard to be that authentic, and to not put kind of this mask of like, oh, I totally know what's going on and my career's gone swimmingly, this kind of thing. I think it's really hard. So if other people find that hard, just know you're definitely not alone at all. I do think what's really difficult about all of this kind of work is that you can't get some kind of tractable measure of your impact. I need like a longitudinal study on the students I've spoken to meet them 10 years down the line to see if they considered a career pathway in maths, which obviously just isn't possible really. And yeah, but what I will say is that your impact can surprise you and come from surprising places. So only a month or so ago, I received an email from one of the teachers who had been at that first talk I spoke about to 300 teenagers. And it was a lovely email thanking me for the talk, because she was still reiterating the things I said to this cohort of students that had just started in September. And so I just never thought of that kind of long-term impact that my words could have. So that was really surprising. I think you never know actually how big your impact is going to be. And my final thought is, obviously I've spoken all about outreach, and I think it would be amazing if we all did more outreach. I think it's great, but I don't think it all starts and stops at outreach. I think we can all have an impact towards kind of diversifying the view of what it means to be a mathematician. And I think that starts within our community, maybe being more transparent about publishing, or getting rejected, or major revisions, or these kind of things, just finding things difficult, and also reminding each other that we're three-dimensional people with lots of interests, and yeah. And then I also think it extends to the people we know in our lives outside of the community. How many times you've been at a family thing and you'll say, oh, I do maths, and they go, oh, you must be so smart, this kind of thing. And I think it's about saying, yeah, thank you, but actually it's really difficult. It's definitely not easy. You just have to keep working on it. We can all do it. This kind of thing. I think we can all have an impact in sort of our daily lives to help diversify that view. And hopefully, my aim is that one day, perhaps it won't be such a big deal to be a woman in maths. Thank you so much.